welcome to the Kyle Olson Show. So earlier this week, I wrote at Breitbart about how Lincoln Project co-founder John Weaver was hired by a state-owned Russian energy company to lobby on Russia's behalf. Russia was going to pay him $350,000 for 6 months of work. It's nice work if you can get it. This is the same clown who accused President Trump of colluding with Russia during the election. So who's the real colluder now? And this Lincoln Project, a bunch of bitter, quote-unquote, Republican consultants who want to elect Joe Biden president and a Democrat Senate. If they're Republicans, why would they want to do such a thing? Well, my first guest today is Julie Kelly, author of the new book, Disloyal Opposition, How the Never Trump Right Tried and Failed to Take Down the President. So, Julie, first of all, I hope your title remains true, but what is the rationale for Republicans wanting to defeat a Republican president and give the Senate to the Democrats?
It is a question for the ages, Kyle. And yes, I hope that title remains true, because that was the title of the book back in February when things looked really kind of locked in for Donald Trump at that point. And then, of course, we've had all this upheaval over the past few months. But that doesn't stop the Never Trumpers from trying. And, you know, to your point, they present themselves as Republicans and conservatives. It's a total head fake. But they are paid to give a false impression that there are a lot of Republicans and conservatives opposed to the president, and that the Democrats actually have a chance, of course they might, to take the White House and the Senate in November. So it's kind of their shtick. It's all performative, but this is how they make their money and get their gigs.
And it's really, well, first of all, if you look at the polling of the Republican Party, the president's support rating is like 95, 96%. I can't think of a Republican president who has had that sort of support. But this, what you're getting into, and the Lincoln Project, I think, is probably the best recent example of sort of the seedy underbelly of politics, where you have consultants who just chase, gig after gig. And so they'll be out there on MSNBC or CNN or wherever and accuse President Trump of colluding with Russia or, all these terrible things. And yet they'll go out and sign contracts with Russia to advocate for Russia's interests against, in a sense, against the United States. Do you see that ever ending, or is that just the way politics is?
I don't know, Kyle. I mean, these people really, most of them are just lowlifes. Okay, so John Weaver, Rick Wilson, Steve Schmidt, who last was seen leading the McCain campaign into a humiliating defeat in 2008. So they really are indecent people, and it's good that we want to be distanced from them. But they're also paid by the left. So you saw, I'm sure, Kyle, in your reporting, the Open Secrets article that detailed where a lot of the Lincoln Project's money is coming from, not from the right, but from the left. And this is the same thing I exposed in my book. A lot of these Never Trump nonprofits that pop up, and they have these patriotic sounding names, Protect Democracy and the Lincoln Project, they are funded by leftists who are opposed to Donald Trump. So not only are they doing this head fake pretending they're conservatives against Trump, they are taking money from the left and portraying themselves as people on the right. It's really an insidious little movement, but the media covers them as if they are legitimate. And as, again, trying to give this impression, I think, to swing voters that Republicans are ready to ditch the president and vote for Joe Biden.
And so what you've got is you have John Weaver and all of the others, really sort of acting as the left's useful idiots, because they will gladly take, the millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars, so then they can give themselves the big, the big paychecks. It was interesting this week. Did you happen to see the interview, quote unquote interview, that Rick Wilson did with the cartoon, figures, and it took the Late Show, and it took them to expose Rick Wilson. And what was fascinating about that was he never saw it coming. You could see the look on his face, never saw it coming. And he thought he was going to go into that interview with the cartoon characters and they were just going to gush all over him. And it was the exact opposite. But these guys think that they can pal around with these leftists, regardless of who it is, Stephen Colbert or who, or the political people, and do their bidding. Do you think that the typical American voter, I'm not saying Republicans, but the typical American voter will see through that?
It's hard to say whether the typical American voter will see that or not. But what was interesting, Kyle, in that interview was just so gratifying to watch, because you're right, Wilson walked into that thinking it was going to be a friendly interview, and they really turned it on its head, exposed him for all the things he used to say about Democrats and the left, and now is taking money from them. So I also talk a little bit about that in my book, but you are right. Useful idiot is the term. It's a chapter in my book. But you see the left and the Democrats a little bit of backlash against these never Trumpers, because they are now recognizing, wait, these are the same people we called war criminals for years. These are the George W. Bush people. These are the McCain people. We don't want them in our camp. We don't even want them pretending to be on the same side. They want them in political no man's land, just like we do. So you're seeing a little backlash there. There was also a left-wing blog that came out this week and posted a bunch of vile tweets from a video editor who was working at the Lincoln Project. So he was outed. So the Democrats are also going after this group too.
Interesting. Where do you see all of this ending? I mean, is this just sort of the way politics works?
These are the same hangers-on and beltway creatures, the Bill Kristols and Jonah Goldbergs. They've been doing the same thing, year after year, mostly wrong. They should have been run out of politics years ago, especially in the Trump era, because they've been wrong basically about everything. So if Joe Biden wins, what will they do? I think some of them fancy themselves as they will pick up the Republican Party from the dust and reformulate it back in the neocon image that they once, held in such high regard. That's not going to happen. So will they keep their gigs at MSNBC and the Washington Post in a Joe Biden era when they can't beat up on Trump anymore? They certainly don't want to listen to them beat up on Joe Biden and the Democrats. So who knows what will happen to them. But I do think it's important that we all work together and keep exposing exactly who they are, what hypocrites they are, and where their money's coming from.
I think there are legitimate criticisms of President Trump, just like there is of anybody. There are tweets that I read the tweets and I go, could you talk about something else, or could you maybe frame that a different way? As a conservative, I'm unhappy with just the wild, out of control spending, and I think that that's something that needs to be taken care of. But that doesn't mean that you say, "Oh, I'm going to elect Joe Biden." And this was the same thing in 2016 with Hillary. You had these never Trumpers who they didn't like Donald Trump. For a lot of reasons, I understand that. But that doesn't mean you elect somebody who will never, ever see things your way, who will never, ever appoint a Supreme Court justice who will uphold the Second Amendment or uphold life or whatever other, issue conservatives care about. I don't understand why they would do this sort of thing, but it's what they're doing. Do you have any sort of insight about what their rationale could be?
I just think this is a way for them to earn money and get attention. And you're right, this is the same recycled playbook that they lost with in 2016. But as he began to govern more conservatively, all of these never Trumpers pivoted on their previous views on conservative issues. So I go through that, how they've changed their mind about gun control and immigration, even tax policy, the Iran nuclear deal. A lot of them were opposed to it. Then they started caterwauling as soon as Trump backed out of it. So down the line, they've changed their positions. There's nothing conservative or Republican about them. And so it's not even legitimate criticism of Donald Trump. It's just this reflexive, ongoing temper tantrum. No matter what he does or says, they go along with the Democrats to criticize him. So they're just not rational people.
Trump derangement syndrome is a nasty, nasty disease, and you don't want to catch it. Julie Kelly, author of Disloyal Opposition, How the Never Trump Right Tried and Failed to Take Down the President, and she's also senior contributor at American Greatness. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kyle.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now is my fellow Breitbart writer, David Eng. David, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Kyle. It's great to be here.
So I wanted to talk to you because I know you've been covering this very interesting story of Lady Antebellum, which is a country band. They came out in June. They decided to change their name because, they're one of those woke bands that doesn't want to be associated with Antebellum. And so they said that they were changing their name to Lady A. But what's interesting about that is that there is a Seattle-based blues singer named Anita White who has for decades been going by the name Lady A, which is sort of set off and created this whole, kerfuffle in the music world. So tell me some more about that story and where that is heading.
Yeah, so this is a really fascinating case, and it kind of illustrates the perils of wokeness, so to speak, and how bowing to the woke mob can sometimes create even more problems for you. So as you mentioned, Lady Antebellum decided last month that it would indeed bow to the woke mob and change its name because it felt that, the word antebellum would remind people of the South before the Civil War, God forbid. And so it shortened its name from Lady Antebellum to simply Lady A, the letter A. But in so doing, it just created more problems for itself because, as you said, it turns out that there is already a singer who goes by that name, Anita White, who is Black and who hails from Seattle and who has been using the stage name Lady A for many years. Now, Lady Antebellum, which consists of 3 white singers, kind of entered into negotiations with Anita White over, this apparent dispute. And apparently those negotiations fell through because last week, the group formerly known as Lady Antebellum filed a lawsuit against Lady A, Anita White, seeking declaratory judgment, which would basically mean that they're asking a judge to decide on the legal status between these two parties. Basically, what the country group is asking is for the judge to say that both parties can use the name Lady A. But the original Lady A thinks that's unfair because when people Google her name, when they go on iTunes to look for her music, what they're going to find is not her music, but Lady that is to say Lady Antebellum's music. So her search results are going to be buried, so to speak, in Google and in other search engines. And so she's trying to come to some sort of resolution with the group. Now, what's interesting about the case is that, Lady Antebellum isn't asking for damages. It isn't asking for her to stop using her original name. The group wants both parties to be able to use the name, so to speak.
Well, but what's, I think, from her perspective, because you touched on iTunes, and when I was looking for her music, I mean, she's basically completely crowded out now by Lady Antebellum, Lady A, and you have to really scroll in order to find her music. But when Lady Antebellum, we'll just call them that, filed their lawsuit, they said, "Today we are sad to share that our sincere hope to join together with Anita White in unity and common purpose has ended." And they were unhappy because she was demanding a $10 million payment, $5 million for her, and then $5 million towards, Black artists generally. And they didn't think that they need to do that. But to me, what this really sort of comes down to is they're the giant in the music world when it comes to, the name, and they can basically just crowd her out. And so, when they say, well, we want to work together and both, use the same name, well, I don't think it really works like that. Do you think it would work like that?
No, I would be hard-pressed to see how that could work simply because of the way Google works and the way iTunes works and the way, Amazon Music works. She would basically be buried. And you're right, it is kind of like a David and Goliath tale. I think what further complicates the issue is that Lady Antebellum is arguing that they have the federal trademark on the name Lady A, but the original Lady A has been using that stage name for many years, decades even. So that creates even more gray space in terms of the legality of the issue. The original Lady A might actually have a good argument in court to say that since I've been using this name for so many years, that I have the right to it, and they don't. So it's going to create a lot of friction between the two parties, I think.
And I know that your background is in reporting a lot on these sort of entertainment situations and cases and things, and it just seems to me like they will have the record company attorney, probably very high profile, high powered attorney coming in to make their case, and where she is more of a regional or a local artist, and she probably doesn't have that firepower behind her. And it's very possible that this band will just come in and overwhelm her. And I don't want to, I really don't like to kind of bring up races in all of these sorts of cases and things. But it just, you have this band that is, doing what they can to try and look woke and not be attacked and all of that. And you've got these white singers, period. And so they, in this attempt to look woke, they step right on this black blues singer from Seattle. And then not only that, they're going after her in court. I just think the optics are very bad. But how do you see this playing out?
Well, like you said, I think that because Lady Antebellum has so much Hollywood might behind it, and you mentioned their legal team, but also their agents, their publicists, their managers, all these parties are going to bring a lot to bear on Anita White. And as you said, she's one person who clearly does not have the same level of resources as Lady Antebellum, which is world-renowned. So I think like you said, they may bury her, legally speaking, under a lot of paperwork and just make it so difficult for her to keep fighting that she just gives up and gives in to their offer, which I think is the most likely scenario, unfortunately. But you are right, the optics is horrible. I mean, it's the great irony of white privilege, right, in this case. So I think that that might also be a factor in it. If the media decides to play that up, then Lady Antebellum may decide not to press so hard. So it's going to be a fine dance for them.
Yeah, and I, generally speaking, am a white privilege skeptic. But that being said, when you look at this case, you go, well, maybe there is something there, because, this band can just, and I don't even know if they did it intentionally. I think that they just thought, we're a big act in Nashville or wherever they are, and they can just, do whatever they want and not really be bothered by Anita White. But what's interesting about it is that she's fighting back. She's not just going to sit and take it, and she is accusing them of using their white privilege and, basically using her as a way to appear, so they can appear not to be, racist or whatever the other terms may be. So this, I think, will ultimately play out in a courtroom somewhere. But have you seen other cases like this in your coverage where, you've got these two parties battling over a name and trademark and all of that kind of thing?
I'd be hard-pressed to find something that is as socially fraught as this case, simply because of when it's happening, which is right after the Black Lives Matter protests and riots, when race seems to be the underlying theme to everything. So usually, I've covered a lot of Hollywood legal cases in my career. They usually don't rise to this level of prominence. They're usually settled out of court, and you never really hear results because they just, the public isn't really that interested. But this is a special case. This really is unique, and I think it's sui generis because of the larger socio-political implications of what's going on here, the optics of it, like we discussed, but also, the larger social temperature of the moment as well. It's just so fraught right now that I think this case has come to symbolize a lot of the conflicting feelings that a lot of people are experiencing right now.
Interesting. David Eng, Breitbart News, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Kyle.
When we come back, Anita White, Lady A, will be joining me. This is the Kyle Olson Show. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. So I just reviewed with David Eng the case of Lady A being sued by Lady Antebellum over the name Lady A. Joining me now are the original Lady A and her producer, John Oliver III. So the original Lady A, tell me about when you began using the name.
I began using this name back in, well, first, good morning, Kyle, and thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me. I'm a little fuzzy this morning, but I began using the name back in the late 80s when a friend of mine was calling me Miss A, but I said, I'm married, and was then back then, and she said, well, then I'm gonna call you Lady A.
Mm.
And I believe that was, late 80s. That was a long time ago. But and then when I moved back to Seattle, I was singing karaoke, and I was singing in a karaoke bar with Team Karaoke in Florida. And then when I came back to Seattle, I was continuing to use the name in the Sunny Byers Band. And actually, I think that's reversed, but in the Sunny Byers Band, I was a Motown singer. I was a background singer, and I was really shy about singing out, with people being able to see me, because I grew up singing gospel music, and I was a choir director. And my back was always to people, so I never had to really face people. So singing out front, I wasn't as confident as I am now. So I never really wanted anybody to know my name. So Lady A just kind of stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and I've been using it ever since.
So it seems to me this band from Nashville, in an attempt to look woke and not racist, changed its name, but then stepped right on you. And so now they've got high-powered attorneys trying to push you around. How do you see it?
I see it as this is what happens when privilege wants to be woke, but really doesn't know how, or makes a misstep in that, because I work in race and social justice on my day job, and so I see this a lot. And there are mistakes that are made, and I think that they thought, oh, we'll just change our name to, our fans call us Lady A. That's what they said, that their fans call them Lady A. How I see it is, if you really want to be woke and Black lives do matter to you, and I'm going to quote what they said. They said, as a band, we have strived for our music to be a refuge, inclusive of all. We've watched and listened more than ever these last few weeks, and our hearts have been stirred with conviction, our eyes opened wide to the injustices, inequality, and biases Black women and men have always faced and continue to face every day. Now blind spots we didn't even know existed have been revealed. So sometimes when you don't know that something, if you don't know something, you don't know. And I understand that. But in your being woke, you can't go from Lady Antebellum to Lady A and think there's a difference. You can't, because if you think that there's a difference in that when you are actually trying to be an ally, and I'm not saying they are, I thought that's what they wanted to be. I had that conversation with Hillary, and and I explained to her, what being an ally looks like. And sometimes being an ally means that you need to give up something. It means that you need to put power behind your words. And right now, that's not what they're doing.
Well, and speaking of those words, it said when they released a statement, and they said they wanted to join together with you in unity and common purpose. What does that mean?
That's what I wanted to know too. From the beginning, they wanted to coexist, and even from the very beginning, I said no. Because for me, I'm an independent artist. So if you say we're going to coexist and we're both going to be Lady A, as soon as you release something, I'm going to disappear. Because I don't have as many fans as you do, but I do have fans, and I've had fans for the last almost 30 years. So just because I don't have as many fans as you do does not make me irrelevant. Right. I'm still responsible to my community, to my fans, and to my family. Privilege allows you to do what you want. But if you're going to be an ally, you need to step up and actually be an ally. We could have worked together. They needed to change their name. Nobody asked them to change their name. They came out in the public and made this big announcement that they were changing their name. And somebody didn't think this through, because if I went on a Google search before all this happened, before June 11th, when I searched for myself, it was Lady Antebellum and there was Lady A, and that was me. So I always knew where I was. I always knew where I was in the stats, but I work hard every day to make sure that I stay relevant on Google, to make sure that I'm putting out CDs. I've put CDs, 5 CDs out under Lady A. They put one single out as Lady A, which they did the week before I put my single out.
Well, and to that point, if you go on iTunes, you have to scroll. You swipe to the left to find you, and because now you have to go through all of their work in order to find yours. So John, I want to bring you in. So you had the two of you had a meeting, a Zoom meeting with Lady Antebellum. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so we had a meeting along with our other producer in Mississippi. His name is Dexter Allen. That was just privately with Lady Antebellum, the artist. So some of these meetings we had were with Lady A, the corporation, which consists of maybe one of the artists, I think it was Hillary, their attorneys, and their management company. That was Lady A, the corporation. But the Zoom call we had was with Lady A, the artist. That was Hillary, Charles, and Dave from Lady Antebellum, and Lady A, Dexter Allen, and myself. That was a different experience, because here you have an artist that sold over 10 million albums reaching out to this independent powerhouse, Lady A, the artist. And it's something that all of us say we've never ever seen or heard before. So it was an experience, but we on our end, we had transparent conversations. Lady A, Dexter, and myself, we were very transparent about what Lady A wanted. She wanted to keep her name.
Mm-hmm.
And the coexisting thing, we were trying to get details about that, right? All three of us, Lady A kept saying, I don't know how coexisting works. I don't know how coexisting works. I want to know how coexisting works. Dexter Allen said the same thing. I said the same thing, and we tried our very best to get them to give us details about how all that would work. It's kind of like what you were saying about the iTunes search. If you go on iTunes, or even if you ask Alexa, you say, Alexa, play Lady A's playlist. Alexa is going to play their playlist now, because the details were not worked out, right? It's like when you go to the grocery store, you can't have Lady A apples and Lady A apples.
Mm-hmm.
That's not practical. So that Zoom call, we tried our very best to get the details of how coexisting works, but it didn't happen.
But you didn't. And they didn't provide any. Did they say that they would, or did they just sort of leave it?
No, they left it. And what's bothersome about that whole Zoom conversation is we gave them options.
Right.
And we gave them options from the very beginning. Lady A and Dexter Allen and myself, we have asked for options, and they never gave it, which led us up to actually maybe changing the narrative and writing down the options, right? Writing down what the details could possibly look like.
Right.
And that's where they went to Rolling Stone saying she's asking them for $10 million. No, what she was doing is giving them an example of what details would look like if they shared the name, or if she had to change her name, right? Because Lady A is a brand. She's been doing this for over 30 years.
Right.
If she had to give up Lady A, that means she basically has to start from scratch as a brand new artist, right? So that's where that money is going to go towards.
Right.
And also her charities.
There is still an opportunity to come together, because forgiveness is part of just, of being a Christian and just being the person that I am. I'm not upset with them. I just think that tell the truth, be transparent, like that conversation you wanted us to have.
Right. Well, Lady A and John Oliver, thanks for joining me today. I hope you're successful in protecting your brand and legacy.
Thank you so much for having us.
Everybody else around us too. Thank you so much.
This is the Kaya Olson Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now is Lynne Patton, Administrator of Region 2 of the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, which oversees New York and New Jersey. She's also a longtime friend of the Trump family and knows them perhaps better than anyone else. So, Lynne, thanks for joining me today.
Great to be here, Kyle. Thanks for having me.
So the Biden campaign last week released the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force recommendations, and it was about 110 pages. There was about a page and a half dedicated to housing, and so I was reading through some of these recommendations, and I thought you were probably, maybe with the exception of Secretary Carson, was probably the best person to talk to. So thanks for joining me. But I just, one of the first things that jumped out at me is gentrification, and they want to combat gentrification. So what do you think the Biden and Sanders supporting hipsters drinking their rice milk lattes in Brooklyn will say about that?
You know, it never ceases to amaze me. And of course, being that I am in the government, there's only a certain amount of attacking I can do. But I do want to say that, this administration wants to do the exact opposite. I was just talking about the deal that we lost with respect to Amazon last year. Raising taxes on big corporations and reinstating burdensome regulations as proposed is a song that we've heard before. And this time, we know that just doesn't work. To the contrary, we want to give communities and buildings and properties tax breaks to bring economic growth, to bring infrastructure improvements, to bring affordable investments and jobs back into distressed urban communities that need it the most. And President Trump and Secretary Carson believe in a localized approach to housing. And we know that these communities know what's best for them. When Amazon pulled out of that deal in the Bronx and Queens, City Island, actual public housing residents told me that they were devastated, and they're still devastated because nobody personally asked them what they wanted. Gentrification has been turned into a bad word, but I see every day with my feet on the ground how helpful and revitalizing that can be to these communities that need it the most. Not only does it oftentimes bring new transportation routes through communities that had food deserts, but it also brings much needed tax dollars into the school system. To me, this is about protecting issue-based advocacy, and $640 million per year for housing for the next 10 years just isn't realistic. I've only been in politics for about 3 years, but even I know that on planet Earth, no matter how much you tax the elite, Congress will never allocate that amount of funding, and nobody has given more money to public housing than President Trump since 1997. And since the Obama administration, Trump has increased HUD's budget by over 20% each year, which is almost $10 billion each year, 5% each year in perpetuity. And that is making a huge difference. And we've recognized that by reducing these oppressive housing regulations and eliminating restrictive prevailing wages on programs such as RAD 2, not only have we maximized the impact of taxpayer dollars, we've effectively restored and built more affordable housing than they did under the last administration, which simply threw money at a problem. And so, I like a good soy milk latte like the next person, but these are not solutions to the problems that I see every day in the inner city.
So you said that President Trump and Secretary Carson support local control, but on page 72 of the Biden-Sanders Unity Plan, it says, quote, eliminate local and state housing regulations that perpetuate discrimination. Now, I think everybody agrees people don't want discrimination, but this sounds to me like the federal government is going to come into local communities and states and tell them how to run their lives. Is that what it sounds like to you?
Kyle, and that's exactly what it was. And what I want to say is that, first of all, it's important to note that affirmatively furthering fair housing is a law. You know, like you said, Kyle, everybody wants to ensure that people are treated equally. There's not one person that thinks discrimination is fair. You know, we all believe that minority lives matter, and we want to see everybody get a hand up, not a hand out.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing I want to say is that the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule implemented under the Obama administration has been suspended by us, by Secretary Carson, since January of 2008. Why? Because you can ask any housing advocate, even the liberal ones here in New York, it did not work, period. Urban and suburban communities across the country found the rule to be burdensome, confusing, and inaccurate. It requires them to submit a report basically every 5 years, sort of an assessment of their own detriments and obstacles in applying fair housing. And what we found at HUD, even before I got here, was that nearly 65% of these communities were submitting reports that were being rejected by HUD under the Obama rule due to the complexity of this rule. And what we did was suspend it immediately, because it helps no one when you're trying to make sure that fair housing rules apply, but yet these communities can't even get their applications approved to get the federal funding that they deserve if they do so. And what the secretary wants to do is ensure that communities are now making their own determinations about how they're furthering fair housing, as opposed to being force-fed by the government. And so by putting that decision-making authority back in local control, communities will be able to better identify what their obstacles are within their neighborhoods to ensure fair housing for everyone. And, last administration, some of these reports, I've been told, from a single community exceeded over 200 to 800 pages because of the oppressive guidelines set forth by the Obama-Biden administration. And at the time, HUD estimated that it would have taken 530 full-time fair housing employees just to read the applications within 1 year, yet alone approve them. And that's the type of staffing that even the last administration didn't have at HUD, and we still don't have. So
right.
Why would you implement a rule that basically works against the community from day one and makes it almost impossible to enforce the whole reason for which it was originally intended, which is to preserve and ensure fair housing? It does nobody any good when the communities don't get the federal funding they need to, build up infrastructure, build up, their schools, their communities, their parks, their streets. And that's what this administration wants to ensure, that we put together a realistic rule that puts local control back in the urban communities and suburbs, because again, they know what's best for them. I'm pretty sure City Island wishes, they could go back to that Amazon deal and do it all over again, because they knew what was best for them, not people who, third-party companies that flew in from California to survey the neighborhood and decide that Amazon didn't belong there. We want to make sure that local communities, local suburbs are speaking for themselves. And actually, I've been told that I can share something on your show that a lot of folks don't know, and that is that the president and Secretary Carson will be making a big announcement on AFFH in the coming days.
Okay, great. Well, we look forward to hearing that. We're just about out of time, but I want to read you this quote from Tucker Carlson, who sort of summarized the Biden plan, and I want to get your reaction to it. So he said, the Biden campaign has highly specific plans on how to do, these various reforms. It's called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. It's a HUD regulation. It was written during the Obama administration. Biden's advisors plan to enforce it. They will cut off critical federal funds for municipalities unless those municipalities submit to federal control of urban planning. Do you think that's accurate?
And this is what we were kind of touching on before, is, what didn't work was the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing rule implemented under Obama. And that's why we came in and suspended it, because these communities were, in accordance to the Obama administration, submitting these extremely lengthy applications that were being rejected by HUD under the last administration due to the complexity of their own rule. Nearly 65% of these communities who were trying to get these federal funds failed. And that does nobody any good. And so what we're doing and what the secretary wants to do now is to ensure the communities are making their own determinations about what obstacles within their communities will ensure fair housing for everyone. And so by putting the decision-making authority back in local control, communities can better identify that.
Lynne Patton, thanks for joining me today. I look forward to hearing more about the rule that you're referring to. Lynne Patton is Administrator of Region 2 of HUD. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4. You can use the same handle for Parler, KYLEOLSON 4. This is The Kyle Olson Show.